Coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Raftellus and GovLove co-host. We have a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking innovation and performance in Brighton. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an engaging local government leaders member. ELGL is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government, and your membership helps support content like this podcast. So if you want to hear more GovLove episodes, go become a member. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Kayla Barber-Perrotta is the Budget and Performance Manager at the City of Brighton, Colorado, a position she's been in since 2021. Prior to that, she served as the Budget Manager and also as the Interim Finance Director for Brighton. And she's also held analyst roles at the City of Thornton, Colorado, and Royal Oak, Michigan before that. With that, welcome to GovLove, Kayla. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Cool. So I know you've listened to a few episodes of GovLove at least, so you know one of our traditions is to start with a lightning round to get to know our guest a little better. So my first question for you, what book are you currently reading?
So I'm actually not reading a book right now. I just got back from a 2-week trip to Europe and then immediately went into gardening season here in Colorado. So between now and the end of May, every ounce of free time is going to be planting vegetables and really working on all of that. So I'm actually not reading anything right now.
Oh, that's totally fair. So I have a lot of garden questions for you that we talked a little bit about before we started recording. So, can you tell us what you're planting? What are you trying to grow this year?
Yeah, so I am growing a lot of different things. Everything from potatoes, lettuce, tomatillos. I'm growing 12 different peppers this year. I'm really big into spicy food, and as my team has noticed. Just hot is not okay. It's got to be XXX spicy. So I am growing ghost peppers this year and Moruga scorpion. And then I bought one that I've never tried before, which was called Death Spiral. So I'm pretty excited for that.
Awesome. That's a highlight. The Death Spiral. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll have to have you back in the fall. You could give a whole recap of the garden. What went well? What's the room for improvement? Yeah.
I don't know. You might have to do a Hot Ones type special for that one. You can see how hot they really were.
Okay. I'm going to resist the urge to turn this whole episode into a gardening podcast. But so my next lightning round question for you: what was the first album that you bought?
So first album that I bought is probably either going to be a Backstreet Boys or an NSYNC album. I was very much a 90s kid and then I think got my first boombox right when both of those groups were debuting. So I'm pretty sure one of those was my first album and I definitely rocked out to it every single day in my bedroom.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I think I've long time listeners to the podcast will know. I think one of my first was an NSYNC cassette.
I used to listen to Tearing Up My Heart on repeat. So
awesome. All right, the next lightning round question for you: what's the last thing, movie, TV show that you've watched?
Yeah, so I just finished watching Get Smart on Netflix last night. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but It's this financial blogger, and he goes and he helps people who are struggling to understand money and how to do personal finances. So just found it the other day and ended up pretty much binge watching it over the course of this week.
Wow. That's very, very highbrow content. So good for you.
I mean, the rest of my content is not. That just happened to be something fun. It was really interesting. So
cool. Very cool. All right. Then my last lightning round question for you: where do you go for inspiration?
So lots of different areas. I do, despite what I said earlier, actually read quite a bit. So I get a lot of inspiration from that. Get a lot of inspiration from just the people I'm around. I kind of love building off the energy of a group, when someone starts an idea and then everybody's sort of bouncing off of it. And then I also like to travel a lot. So I just got back from Europe and we went to Amsterdam, Germany, France, and just seeing how different things are done over there and just everything from public transportation to the way that they incorporate more wild, I'm going to describe it as wildlife, I guess, or more natural landscapes into their communities. All of that was super inspiring and is all I have been able to talk about with my team over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, very cool. No, definitely traveling, especially in places that are like different than the way the North American cities have developed. Like that's definitely I can relate to that.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to like just see how differently cities and different places have overlapped. And just there was this really cool thing when I was in Germany in one of the towns where I loved, they had this like public art piece in one of their town squares, and it was like a public art piece that was like a stone version
Mm-hmm.
of the town, and like it looked like an art piece, just that was all its function from afar. And then when you got up to it, it actually had braille
Oh,
all
cool.
over it so that like people could feel out kind of the layout of the town and know where they were in relation to everything. It was really, really cool to see something like that.
Wow, that's really cool. Awesome. So the other thing I always like to ask folks that is kind of their path to local government. So what was your path to local government as a field, and then to your role in Brighton?
Yeah, so I did not anticipate going into local government. I always knew I was going to go into government in some form, but I grew up very much thinking that the only type of government that there was the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So my degree is actually in international affairs, because I thought I'm going to grow up, I'm going to go out, I'm going to be like an international lawyer, or I'm going to work for the State Department, and just travel the world and do that. I ended up changing my mind after my internship with Royal Oak. So I happened to get the internship at Royal Oak because my husband, he got a job in Michigan while I was still in grad school. So I took this internship in Royal Oak that was supposed to be just sort of a temporary 1 year get experience sort of thing. And as I was going through that, I actually had people who I was friends with who went into like the State Department ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And they were telling me on a regular basis how just miserable they were and how they felt like just cogs in a wheel. And they were very much like pushing paper day to day. It wasn't this glorious, glamorous thing that we had all thought it would be. And I was actually having a lot of fun and doing really fun things and interesting work in my internship. So that's kind of where it shifted, and I started to realize I really enjoyed having a impact that was tangible that I could see. So I actually ended up sticking around in Royal Oak. I did their Disney Way program, which was really my first foray into sort of organizational culture. And I was really lucky to have a fantastic city manager who empowered me, trusted me to do a lot of different projects. And so I just grew this really big passion then for local government. Fast forward a few years, my husband and I decided Michigan was not the state for us. We both grew up down south where you see sunshine.
Yeah.
And in Michigan, there's several months out of the year that it is just gray and gloomy and pretty well miserable. So we kind of pulled out a map, said, where do you want to live? And Colorado won out. He really likes to snowboard, and there was plenty of sun for me. So I just sort of stumbled into an analyst role over at the city of Thornton. And while I was doing my time there, we actually moved to the city of Brighton. And then just shortly after that, Brighton posted for their first budget manager in the history of the city. And I looked at it, and despite what people told me, I decided to go ahead and take it because at that time, Brighton was not doing super well.
Yeah.
There was a lot of turnover at high leadership positions. There was a mayoral recall, and there was sort of a water scandal where there was this perception that there was a slush fund for the city. So the idea of taking a budget manager role, when I talked to people about it, they were like, are you sure you really want to do this? But for me, I like working in the community that I live in. So I felt like I was giving back and, hey, I could do something to make it better for myself and my neighbors.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and I know I've seen you give presentations before, so I know the context around Brighton is part of what led to some of the academy work that we'll talk more about.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, I'm curious. So you mentioned that internship. Was there something that you got to work on that was like this is the right career path for me and made you want to stick with local government, like a project or something that you got to work on that made that choice clear for you at all?
Yeah, I would say certainly the work that I did with the Disney Way. So when I joined Royal Oak, it was right after the Great Recession. And it was another instance where there was a lot of low morale, a lot of disengagement. And I got the opportunity to sort of be this cultural champion, look at different options for sort of resetting organizational culture there. And so I got to really do a lot of work with that. In that case, we hired a consultant to help out with that. But then I was responsible for carrying on those programs after the initial trainings and getting to meet like every single person in the city, getting to hear really in depth what they were doing, what their pain points were, and then getting to create a number of interdepartmental teams afterward was a huge highlight for me. It just let me see how many different things local governments actually do. And so it was a really great way for me to get an introduction and to feel like I was making a difference. Another project that kind of comes to mind right away was with our energy company out there. So we had this LED conversion program that we were doing or wanting to pursue that we had been paying into this electric company for years. And when we finally got to pulling the trigger on it, they told us, the money that you've been putting in here, it's not eligible for what you want to do. And that was news to us, and not only us, but news to a number of cities around us. So I actually got the opportunity to do a lot of research, pull together, and build this model to kind of show and make a case for why what we were doing or looking to do qualified for that funding. And it actually ended up spinning into this multi-city group that ended up eventually getting lawyers involved, and we actually successfully sued this energy company to be able to do our LED conversion program. So to kind of see that start from I have no experience with this at all to we had a successful lawsuit, which doesn't generally happen against an electric utility like that. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a fun thing to have gotten to work on. Both of those.
Yeah, it's one of those that when it was assigned, it was pretty scary, and I was thought, oh my God, this is impossible. But when it was complete, it felt huge. Yeah.
No, those scary assignments are the ones that you look back and like, actually, that really helped the development. Yeah, awesome. And for listeners that maybe haven't been to Colorado or kind of the Front Range area, can you tell them a little bit about Brighton, and then actually maybe we can lead into some of the cultural context that you were hinting at earlier.
So Brighton, like I said, 20 to 30 minutes northeast of Denver. Really that gateway into the metro area when you're coming from Kansas. It's the first civilization that you see. And it is known by our staff, a lot of the locals, as kind of that little big city because we grew so rapidly, like much of the Denver metro area. So over the course of 2 decades, we actually grew from being a very small rural community to a community of over 40,000 people. So it's actually not abnormal. When you're driving through Brighton, you will actually see on one block, you will have a rather dense downtown because we actually are lucky enough to have a true downtown. You will then see, a little bit of suburban area. Then you'll see a full-fledged operational farm, and then you'll go straight back into a suburban area with a Target. It's a really weird, interesting dynamic. But with that, it brings a lot of challenges because when you're in a city in transition, especially one that's grown so rapidly, it's really hard to keep up with that growth. You have the resources in place for that small community, and you have everything coming at you. You're having to grow very quickly, expand your services, but oftentimes you don't have the resources coming in until after the fact to support that growth. This is one that I'm really keen to as a budget manager. You always see all these needs for all the new people coming in, but you don't get the sales tax revenue until after they're here. It's a fun challenge. But what that ended up doing is it just put the city in a position where it wasn't well situated to perform the services it needed to for all of that growth. And that ended up putting the city in a position where, it was ripe for this perception that the city wasn't doing the things that it should be doing, or that it was doing things that were unethical. And that's where sort of we went through a turbulent couple of years. And this is before I joined the city.
Yeah.
They went through a turbulent couple of years. Politically, they had a lot of turnover with city managers, with high-level directors, like their finance directors. And we're really in a bad spot. In about 2019, they had a mayoral recall, and this ultimately tied to this perception that the city was misusing funds, that there was this slush fund. So in 2019, the city actually posted for their first budget manager in the history of the city. So just remembering, very small community, they had never really had a need for someone to really overlook their budget. And now that they were sort of facing this perception of unethical use of money, they wanted someone in there who could really take a look at that, really make sure everything was on the up and up, and make sure that we were managing our finances professionally moving forward. So I ended up taking that job, which, as I hinted to earlier, was something that, as I talked to some of my coworkers and connections, raised a couple of eyebrows of why in the world would you want to go there? But it ended up being a really great opportunity. It was a couple of really bad years. We thought we'd kind of hit, I thought I was coming into rock bottom in October of 2019. I mean, how much worse can you get? And then started setting up all these structures for the budget. And then we had COVID-19 hit.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Which just, it just made it worse. I think we finished the first, I did the first budget in just a matter of a couple of months, because we had to have it adopted in time for January 1. And then immediately 3 months later had to redo the entire thing.
Wow.
But that really just put us in for what was for a while a downward spiral. So you had all of those things happening politically, all of those growth challenges. You had that high turnover with leadership. And that ultimately got us to a point where we had over 30% turnover in the organization.
Wow.
I know, it's crazy. Some departments had 150% turnover in 1 year.
Yeah, because if it's that high org-wide, there's places where it's much worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's not to be unexpected. When you're facing those type of challenges, I mean, that creeps into what you're doing every single day, right? You have people who are getting very frustrated and burned out. If you've got high turnover like that, everybody's wearing multiple hats. So it was not a great place. And we're pretty honest about it. It was not a great place for a couple of years there. But luckily, we have gotten to this position in 2021. We got a new city manager. We were coming out of the pandemic. We had this really great synergy that was happening on our council. And we kind of looked at that and we said, let's make something of this opportunity and let's never go back down that pathway that we were in 2019 and 2020, which is where things like the Performance and Leadership Academy came from. That was really our first big initiative to try to reset the organization.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And like I said, I want to talk way more about the academy, but I'm curious, just the budget nerd in me has to ask. You're coming in as the first budget manager in a place that's, dealt with some challenges, to put it maybe mildly. So what were some of the things that you set up, or that you were trying to set up? And then, what was it like coming into that, and then figuring out how do we want to set this budget process up? And then I'm curious about how COVID scrambled all of that. But
so there were some good opportunities here, and there were a lot of challenges here. So up until that point, my understanding was the budget process, if you will, for the city was a pretty transactional. We have an analyst who calculates a singular number for every single department. You get that number, and that's what you work with year to year. There's really no discussion around it. So when I came in, it is very important for me that a budget process really be collaborative with departments, and that it is ultimately you are creating sort of the largest policy document for the city. So I actually had to set up everything. There were no processes in place, so to speak. So that first year, it was really very quickly doing sort of a check-in on what in the world was, the state, and then pulling together key reviews, actual discussions with departments. And that was a really interesting one because a lot of them had never done that in their career. Because coming up as a smaller community, you had a lot of people there who had been there for a really long time. So this was sort of introducing them to, hey, we'd love to talk to you about what you're doing and kind of what your budget goals are and how we can assist you. It was a lot of relationship building because the first thing, first question you get back on that is, why in the world are you talking to me about my money? So that was interesting. So, I mean, we set up everything from just the budget review processes to budget tracking to doing projections and modeling for the first time for the city. So we actually do 10-year models now. We also set up the entire grant process for the city. The city had kind of hodgepodge gone after grants before, but because nobody felt comfortable, they weren't really using them on a regular basis or pursuing them on a regular basis. And then because we were really successful, and I'm going to say we because I very early on realized I'm going to need help with this and was lucky enough to get my own fellow to help with that. And ultimately they became an analyst on my team. But all of these discussions, all these relationships that we were building kind of ultimately ended up positioning us to be involved in a lot of different discussions, from everything from how do you look at capital projects to some early pieces of our strategic plan. So there was a really good couple of months where we were working really hard, but seeing a lot of good progress. And then I remember COVID distinctly because we had on that Thursday, my team helped put together this strategic planning session for our city council, and we had it on a Thursday, and we all left that feeling, okay, there's some good opportunities here. We're finally having a little bit of discussion about kind of where to go next. And we pulled that together. And then on Monday, they shut, the city down for COVID, for the pandemic. So we immediately had to sort of re-scramble, reprioritize, and there was really nothing to look at for planning around COVID. The best that we could look back at was data from the Great Recession. But even that wasn't remotely similar. So we ended up going back through the same discussions that we had just done with the departments, where we had this really great, you can add personnel because now that we're modeling sales tax, we can tell you we're expecting growth of, 9% this year. And then we immediately went back and had to redo all of those discussions and really come from this place of what can we actually now afford, not knowing, what the impact is actually going to be. We were very, very lucky on a couple of fronts. One, because they had not had a history of really knowing their long-term projections, I think there was a little bit of being more conservative for several years than when the city maybe could have expanded services a little bit faster. So that ended up giving us a little bit of a cushion to deal with COVID-19 and the pandemic closures. But we also got very lucky, being a smaller community, that we didn't have a lot of variability in our sales tax. So we were pretty much a bread and butter community, as we put it. We had grocery stores and we had Home Depot. And Home Depot, everybody wanted to do their DIY during COVID. And grocery stores, obviously, people had to buy food. So we actually still saw our sales tax increase during the pandemic. Not the 9% we thought it would, but it still went up about 2% during that time, which was a huge win for us, because it meant we didn't have to lay anybody off in the city.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Well, I can't imagine you're trying to set up this new process for the budget budget development, and here's a completely new thing that no organization has dealt with, at least in the last 100 years.
I was regularly telling my fellow, I was like, this is not normal. Do not expect your entire career to be like this. But you're gonna go through the hardest piece in your first year, and everything else from here is gonna be so much easier.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's great. So you referenced this before, but one of the things you noticed was about organizational culture, and as you got things kind of settled, you wanted to take advantage of that and establish this performance and leadership academy. So maybe like before we get into the nitty gritty on what makes up the academy, can you talk about like why was that the thing that you wanted to pursue as like hey, I think there's something here around culture. Let's do this performance academy. Why was that the solution that you wanted to kind of test out or try out?
So there was a couple things. One, obviously with my history, doing the Disney Way program with the City of Royal Oak, that played in a little bit to it. I had also gone through the Denver Peak Academy, which is an excellent program for learning process improvement tools. And I knew we needed to do something that was going to be big and that was going to be bold. And I was lucky enough to, like I said, have a really great city manager come in. He had actually gone through the Denver Peak Academy as well. And we sat down and we kind of had a conversation about how do we use the momentum that we have right now to really make sure we can't go back. We need to do something that's so big and so ingrained in every aspect of what we do, and so habitualized that we can never slide back. So that really only leaves you with the option of doing something culturally.
Yeah.
And we initially sort of talked about, okay, could we bring someone in from the outside to maybe do some sort of training? But the reality was going to be when we looked at that, we were going to spend $30,000. We were going to get maybe 40 employees trained up, and then it wouldn't be sustainable, right? You'd have that first group who got to do it, and then unless you were going to pay $30,000 every single year, you were never going to touch all of your employees. So it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that we needed to do something that was internal. And that was going to be tailored to our pain points, so that our employees could actually see some reason to buy into it. And I got lucky enough. I had just hired someone on my team who actually had a degree in organizational development. So we really sat down, and Michael, our city manager, sort of gave us the go-ahead to come up with an idea of what an academy could look like. And I think we went way beyond what he thought when he gave us that direction. But we ultimately sat down. We spoke with employees, our 3Es team, which is our kind of employee experience team, employee engagement team. We actually have a separate employee experience team now, so I need to be clear on that.
Yeah.
And we really started asking people, what was going on? What were their pain points that they were dealing with? And we pretty well heard quickly that the turnover is a problem, right? We're constantly in training mode. We can never get anything done. We don't know what our purpose is anymore, because when you have really high leadership turnover and you go through something like the pandemic, you just feel like you're being jerked every which way. So they no longer knew what their purpose was. We heard from employees that we don't have professional growth opportunities. There's no way for me to develop. There's no investment, in my future. And then we also knew from our side, being, the budget piece as well, that we needed to make some corrections financially as well, because we hadn't grown in the way that we were hoping to over the last couple of years. So ultimately, we ended up looking at those pain points and really building an academy that responded to those pain points. So the way that the academy is structured, it's actually a 5-week program. So we do 5 Thursdays, 8:30 to 12:30 each of those Thursdays, with our lessons sort of building on each other. So week 1, we actually start with our culture module, and that's very intentional. One of the things that we decided really early on, or recognized really early on, was that if you don't fix the culture in the organization, if you don't address that elephant in the room, anything else that you give training on is not going to matter. Yeah. When you look at a lot of the research, I don't know if you're familiar with Gallup's State of the American Workplace, but they regularly do polling of workers across the country for, what they're looking for in jobs, why they leave. And if you look at the top 10 reasons over the last several years, most of those have to do with culture being why someone leaves an organization. So we knew if we didn't address culture, if we didn't talk about what a strong, positive culture looks like and what the culture was we wanted to build at Brighton, we were just going to train people up and then have them leave and take that knowledge with them immediately. So that's where we focused on week 1. Week 2, we started talking about. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So for the culture piece, how did you guys kind of identify what that culture is that you're trying to build, and then what are the ways that you're kind of getting that across? Is it just how are you trying to instill that in folks in that lesson?
Yeah, so there's so many different pieces to this that it's hard to figure out what to focus on.
But
yes, that's actually a really great question. So because we didn't just sit in a room and go, you know what, our culture should be this. That's not how that works. It was actually a whole process to even come up with that. So we started from scratch on what the culture at the City of Brighton should look like. So we actually did some storyboarding activities with a couple different groups. So it was very important for us to make sure that the culture was not just something that was dictated from the top down, that it was something that our employees could see themselves in. Yeah. So we started out by doing some storyboarding activities, which is just sort of an information gathering visualization tool. We started doing those with our 3Es committee because they're largely frontline workers and there's representatives from every single department. And we really asked them that question of what should the values of the City of Brighton be, and then had them sort of prioritize those, tell us what we were doing well, maybe what we needed to work on. We then did a similar activity with the executive leadership team to hone that in further. So ultimately, we ended up coming up with sort of 5 core values for the organization, and they are that the City of Brighton is a customer-centric organization. We're a transparent organization. We are accountable. We are purposeful, and we are communicative. And that really all trickled up from across the board. It's always so funny when you do these activities with different groups, and they all think they're going to have very different answers. Yep. But whether it's someone in public works or someone in the city clerk's office, or it's a director or a maintenance worker on the front line, they all end up having very similar themes. Yes. So that's how we ended up coming up with that sort of cultural piece. And that's the backbone of what we teach in that first week in the academy, is really what does the culture here at the City of Brighton look like. And we do a really fun activity in that one too. So storyboarding is the favorite tool. We have some pretty good data on that. We actually collect data from our employees when they do innovation projects on what tools they use to do it. And so we know based on that storyboarding is our a favorite among our employees. But we teach that in week 1. And we actually utilize a storyboarding activity where we have been asking them, what are the barriers that we need to address in order to maintain or execute that culture and those values in the City of Brighton. Yeah. And it's really funny because we used to get like 50 responses per group on that. And we just kicked off our fourth cohort yesterday, did the same question And we are going to have to now change our question
Yeah.
because we only got about 5 different responses from some of the groups. So I think that's good. That means we've made
Yeah,
progress.
it's good. Yeah.
But it also means we might be working ourselves out of a job.
Oh wow. Yeah, I mean that's great. That's so much work to just to get started on kind of like the table setting for this academy. So that's fascinating. And I will say, like, as a now a consultant, having worked with lots of local governments, there are definitely themes across different organizations and their strategic plans and their values. Like, so it's not just groups within an organization, but across, like, there's very similar people that are public service oriented and want to give to their community. They have a lot of the same values and things that drive them. So it's not surprising that you're hearing kind of some similar things from.
Yeah, no, that was no surprise to us. I've done different activities with other cities when I was in Michigan, and you
Yeah.
hear very similar things from them as well. So it's helpful though, because it gives you something very early on that
Mm-hmm.
everybody can buy into, and when people start to see um, how common sort of their drivers or their own
Yep.
personal values are with those around them, it's a really good starting point where they feel like, okay, hey, maybe
Yeah.
we can be successful with this. We actually have people apply to be in our academy, and one of the questions that we ask them on that application is also what they think the core values for the City of Brighton should be.
Yeah.
And we actually take all of those results in each class and we make a word cloud out of it. And then we compare that with a word cloud of all of the responses that we've received from the beginning on this. And it's so funny because, like, I can tell you right off the bat, the top 2 are always transparency and communication.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually like teamwork or service is right up there as number 3.
Yep. That's awesome. Yeah. So, and then you were going to talk about week 2 now that we've really.
Yeah. It's okay. We jump all over the place.
No worries. Well, I do, just before we move on to week 2, I do want to underline, like, even though there's some commonalities, right? It's also that process of engaging folks, and it's building from the bottom up those values that is as important, I think, or it seems like from the outside, as just identifying the right ones. Is you want to have people feel included and feel heard, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, values are something that people develop over the entirety of their lives. So if you can build organizational values that your teams can already see themselves in, you're going to have a much easier time moving forward and be able to build a more sustainable culture than if you try to force a set of values on them and then drag them into them, kicking and screaming.
Yeah, well said. All right, so week 2 of the academy, I'm on board with the values and the culture that you want to build. Now, what are you doing with us?
Yeah, so then we go, okay, so we've set this foundation with culture. The next piece that we have to address is that turnover pain point, and how do we build strong teams, keep them together, and then also how do we exit strong people, because inevitably at some point people are going to leave your organization. So week 2 is entirely around the employee cycle. We actually teach the employee S-curve, which really looks at the way that the length of time a person has been with your organization sort of corresponds with their learning, and then also corresponds with how close they are to the exit from your organization. Case in point, if you have someone who's really new, they're having to learn a lot. They're not giving you a whole lot back. You're investing a lot in them, but you're not getting a whole lot out of them. And then if someone's been with you for a really long time, they've probably mastered what they're doing. And if they don't have a lot of growth opportunity or learning opportunity, they're probably going to look for something else. So we try to teach our employees about that, so they can kind of identify those pieces in their own teams. And then we try to teach them techniques to get employees into what we call the sweet spot, which is this engaged employee sort of right in the middle of that S-curve. So we talk about everything from, how do you hire for fit? So getting back to that cultural piece, and how it's easier to bring people in that are bought into your values than it is to force them into them. We talk about ways to incorporate culture into the way that you market and talk about positions. We do a really, really fun activity where we actually have groups look at job postings that are actually from the city and go through them after they've learned these techniques and sort of mark them up. And we actually give that feedback to the departments that put them together originally. But that's always a really fun one because we've had a couple times where someone in the group, that's a job posting they're very familiar with. And we have had some groups be like, man, we just need to burn all of our job postings because we've just been layering on the same old same and it's not doing anything for us. Yeah. So we go through that. We go through, how to put on a good orientation and onboarding process. We talk a lot about professional development and different ways you can achieve that because it's not always just paying to send someone to, a 1-hour training. We talk about things like stretch projects. How do you give people opportunities to sort of cross-train and sort of build different opportunities in their career. And we have a really good hard talk about, the importance of having regular check-ins with your employees and how you have those conversations around their development goals. Because it's really important to us at the City of Brighton that we're talking to our employees about their development goals because we understand that they still have those development goals, whether we're talking to them or not. And if we can be supportive in those goals, one, that can give us the opportunity to identify early on if there's other opportunities within the city. Because if we have a really great employee and they're kind of reaching their maximum in where they're at, there might be opportunities elsewhere for them. But it also allows us to plan for a positive exit for them because we ultimately want to build, brand ambassadors when someone's leaving, right? We don't want someone to say, man, I left the City of Brighton because it was an awful place to work. We want them to go out to their next position and let people know, hey, I left the City of Brighton because, they helped me develop in all of these ways. And they were super supportive of me moving into this position I'm in now. And, let other people know, hey, that's a really great position with a lot of opportunity. Yeah. But we also want to build those really strong relationships with former employees so that in the future, if there's an opportunity to come back that fits, where they're at now, they can do that. We actually have a really great example of that on my own team. That analyst that I talked about, who started out with me in the budget trenches in 2019, ended up leaving the city and has actually come back in the last couple of months because of a good opportunity becoming available. Cool. So really trying to close that loop all the way through.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. So they got 3 more weeks. So what else are we taking folks through?
Yeah. So week 3 is when we really start getting into process improvement. That's where we teach a lot of the lean process improvement tools, things like process mapping. The way that we approach it, we actually shy away from some of the more technical terms in lean. And we really focus on this idea of what's your pain point. That is the repeating question throughout the remainder of that course, because for our group, what we found was a lot of our employees sort of didn't connect with this, okay, we're doing process improvement because it saves money. No, you're doing process improvement because it makes your day-to-day life and the things that you struggle with in the office easier for you. So you're not like pulling your hair out because you're redoing the same form, 20 times or spending 3 hours trying to get help for a victim of a crime because you don't have, the tools that you need in order to do that job. So week 3 really focuses on the starting pieces of lean process improvement, focusing in particular on sort of identifying what your pain point truly is, and then digging into understanding kind of why it's a pain point. Week 4, we go a little bit more deep into process improvement, but we take it from this perspective of leading from any seat. So we actually really focus on this idea of, you can be a leader, whether you are a manager or a frontline employee. It doesn't matter what your title is. Everybody has that capability. And we walk people through how to sort of design solutions and how to start to bring other people on board with those solutions, or bring in other people to kind of round out their teams. And then we kind of put a nice little bow on it in week 5, where we really dig into how do you get that solution from just idea to actual implementation, so it doesn't just end up on a shelf, getting dusty. So we really go through how to build work plans, how to build strategic plans, how to analyze your solutions to your pain points, so that you can identify, potential barriers early on and plan mitigation strategies for them. And then we also have our employees during that pick a project that they will do for an innovation, because we do require that they use 2 tools out of that 5-week program to implement an innovation in their area. And so far, we have 20, actually it's 24 now. I got 2 more in late yesterday afternoon. So far we have 24 innovations that have been implemented.
Cool.
And we now have crossed over the $200,000 mark in savings.
Oh, wow.
And more importantly, we've passed over 3,600 hours of employee time saved.
Wow.
Which I think is the bigger thing.
Yeah.
I know people probably think as budget manager, I want to focus on the hard cost, but for me, employees, the expenses around that are far more exponential and impactful on a budget. So if you can get people time back where they can actually be doing other things, that has a bigger impact.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with you that, and that's like almost two full-time staff that you're saving. So, what are maybe some examples?
Believe me, they have plenty of other things to work on.
Yeah, I'm sure they're finding time. Yeah, finding.
Yes.
So maybe can you give some examples of some of those innovations that folks came up with and implemented?
Yeah, we've got a pretty wide example area to pull from here. So one of the ones that I really love, and this gets me excited because just how simple it was, is one of the earliest innovations we had was with our victim advocates. So our victim advocates they're oftentimes sort of that first person after the police respond to a crime. They're the first persons out there to really deal with the victims, see what they need. Oftentimes those victims might need somewhere to stay. They might not be able to go back into their home. So they need clothing, they need food, just, sort of basic sort of survival things. And it used to be that our victim advocates could not do or purchase any of that on their own. No matter what time of night it was, they had to call up their manager. Their manager had to sort of go find whatever it was, pay for that, and then get it to that advocate to support that victim. And that would be usually on the average was about 3 hours to get that victim connected with the services they needed. Sometimes it could be as much as 24 hours, just depended on what they needed.
Yeah.
So very simple innovation that our victim services manager put together was to, one, get her staff trained up on P cards so that they could actually have a P card, and then put together checklists that made it very easy for them to go, okay, here's the things that I can immediately do, and here's the things where it's a little bit of a bigger deal, and then I do in fact actually need to get an extra level of permission for.
Yeah.
And what that did is it allowed them to take that from an average of 3 hours per victim to an average of 1 hour per victim,
wow.
which is a huge response, particularly for, a population that is as vulnerable as victims of crime. And then another one that I really, really like is our recreation department. A lot of their seasonal employees would hold multiple jobs during the season. And so they had multiple job descriptions, multiple pay codes, and were having to basically fill out multiple timesheets when they, wanted to get paid every 2 weeks, which then created multiple timesheets for the same person that had to be reviewed and signed off on by their managers. So a lot of time going into that. And one of our recreation supervisors actually looked at this and said, you know what? I'm going to work with HR. I'm going to work with our payroll department, and I'm going to consolidate a lot of these titles so that there's multiple job duties under one pay code, and then we don't need to be spending as much time doing all of these approvals, all of the rework on this. So that was also a substantial time saver from a very simple change.
Simple. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. Those are great ideas. And those are, I think, both examples of things where, even if you, Kayla, the person trained on performance improvement and process improvement, had all day, all month, all year to sit and think about, ideas to implement, you probably would never come up with those, because it's the people doing that work that notice those things, right?
Yeah, that's why it's so important. There was a discussion when we were looking early on at the academy of like, do you put all the directors through first and then managers, and then do you have the front line go last? And we were pretty dead set that we were going to have a good mixture of people from all levels early on, because as we put it, your frontline employees know their jobs best, and they're going to know their pain points best, and they're probably going to be the best resource to go to figure out how to solve them.
Yeah. Fascinating. So, I'm just curious in terms of like size and how you pick folks for each cohort. So, how big is each cohort? And I like the mix idea. That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like that's part of the application process and the like vetting, that you want to make sure that there's a good mix of folks.
Yeah. So we do about 20 participants per cohort. And like you, as I mentioned earlier, yes, we do the application process. And as part of that, we ask about what department they are in. We ask about what position they are with the city. We ask them about how long they've been with the city. And the idea there is we really want to be intentional about getting a mixture of people from different departments, different levels, and also different experience with the city. Because one of the biggest things that we have heard from our employees that they like about the academy is not just the tools that they learn, but how much learning goes on from just being with people who have different jobs from what they do day to day, and have different experiences with the city day to day. We actually do, this was another one that was super controversial, and I thought was really funny that people were so surprised by this. We actually do assigned seating in the academy. So we actually comb over every application, and not only do we make sure there's a mixture of people in the room, every single table is a mixture of people, so that people are working with people they normally don't.
That's awesome. That's some attention to detail. I like it.
Yeah, it's a lot of thinking that has to go into it, because like there's certain activities, like when we do the job postings, one in week 2, we want to make sure there's at least one person at a table that's like familiar with kind of what that job does, so that they can provide the others at the table a little bit of insight. And then we do a strategic plan activity in week 5, where again we want someone who is at that table that is familiar with sort of that strategic planning area and what might go into it. So it's a lot of like, it's a puzzle. You think you have a whole layout, and then you're like, okay, now let me look at what job postings I'm going to assign and which strategic plan I'm going to use for these groups. And then you end up moving people around because you want to make sure you have all of these factors accounted for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's a small thing, but I think it shows the intention around like, you can't just throw people together and have the outcome you're looking for, or change the culture in the way that you want it to be. You have to be very intentional and think about all these things, right? So like that attention to detail is important because it helps build to that larger goal.
Yes. And people notice too, which I think they notice the level of effort that we are putting into it. And we've had some really good feedback. We've actually had a couple of people who have like cried in some of the classes, because they're just like, I'm so thankful for the like amount of attention this program is giving, and just the time commitment, and they can tell that it is something that the city is invested in. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. That warms my heart.
It warms my heart every single time. I always get excited when we are down to another cohort. It kind of feels a little surreal every single time.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'm curious, you mentioned you're just launching the 4th one. Has the curriculum? Anything changed as you've kind of done, or have you changed anything as you've done more and more cohorts?
Every single cohort, actually.
Yeah.
So we started out with our grand idea, but one of the things that we made sure we did early on was if we were going to encourage other people to be making process improvements and, sort of little by little addressing their pain points, it was important for us to live that. So we actually do some activities that get feedback from each of our cohorts on kind of what worked, what didn't work. We listen to them in terms of where they maybe needed a little bit more help. So we have actually rearranged modules. We've taken out modules, introduced new modules related to that. One of the big things that we kind of heard after our first two cohorts was we had a really strong emphasis because of the lean piece that your process improvements or innovations always had to be free. Like there needed to be no cost to them. And it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that for our organization, because we hadn't really taken these great leaps with new technology as it came out, or best practices as they came out, in a lot of areas we were kind of 10 years behind. So we actually ended up taking out this idea that it had to be free, and we started talking in terms of ROI, return on investment. And so we actually teach now our employees how to look at ROI, and we've actually worked with them to build an ROI calculator that they can use really easily. That has been very helpful because it's allowed some of these groups that were like, hey, I have this really strong pain point, but I'm going to, one of the things I'm looking at would require like a $3,000 investment. But, okay, let's look at this. The payback period on this is like, 2 years. And we're then suddenly going to be saving, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head here, but we're suddenly saving like 3 times that. We've had several projects like that simply by lifting that one requirement that is typical of a lean process improvement made a huge difference. And what was interesting about that is there was a little bit of trepidation that, people would go wild and crazy and like, I want to spend 100,000 on this and 400,000 on that. And we haven't seen that. We talk heavily about this idea of like, start with something small, the small wins, the small savings, they build up and they allow you to afford to do these larger things. And people have been very respectful of that.
Yeah. Very cool. That's awesome. I love that. And probably one of the benefits of you being the budget manager is you can make some room for those small things that they need to fund.
It's made it a much more exciting conversation, not only in the academy, but in our budget process as well. Like last year was the first year that we had a lot of our departments bring sort of their next level managers to their budget reviews. Because of this idea that, okay, hey, we're building up this idea that people can, have ideas from all levels of the organization. And hey, this is one of our really big pain points. We think it's going to be a bit of a bigger budget discussion, and we're bringing the people into the room who are actually experiencing it. So it's been really good.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. So what's next for the academy? I mean, you just launched cohort 4. What's kind of your plans for the next, I don't know, year or 2 or 5 or 10?
Well, one thing that's really interesting right now is we're actually training up 2 new people to help with the facilitations, which I'm really excited about. Because one of the big things for us with developing the academy was it needed to be sustainable past one person. We didn't want, myself or Tracy McLean, who was the other analyst who helped found it. We didn't want, if one of us left or both of us left at some point, this to die. So we're training up our next group of facilitators right now, which is amazing. We are also, we have a number of spin-off things that are coming from it. So we've introduced Spark events. One of the things that we heard from the feedback from employees that went through the academy is sometimes there were pain points that were just so sensitive that they really needed sort of a third party to facilitate them. So we just recently introduced Spark events where we will go in and help facilitate those major pain point discussions with the department. So we do like a 90-minute facilitation with them on that to really start moving that forward. And then the other thing that we're talking about right now, and this is like hot off the press, is we're in very early discussions around doing what we're affectionately calling a Flash Academy, because we are hearing some feedback. So the schedule that we did was very intentional to work with our departments and to also make sure people didn't get burned out by all the information coming at them. And it has worked for most of our departments. However, we have now found that there's a couple of departments that it's a real struggle for them to commit someone each week like that. Yeah. So we're looking at what it would look like, and if we could, do a 3 or 4 day program in a row, kind of what that would look like. The other thing with that is we've also gotten a lot of, because we recently opened the academy to outside government entities and nonprofits. We've also gotten a lot of interest in it, but the 5-week spread has been a bit of a barrier for them as well. So we're kind of looking at that and seeing, like, is that something we can do? And if we did that, would we have sort of good demand for that? So right now we're kind of talking about piloting a flash session in 2024, just to give people a different type of option for how they receive that.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. That Flash Academy is pretty interesting. So I assume it's like departments like maybe police where, they're not able to do kind of one day a week for 5 weeks. Is that right? Or are there other folks that might work for?
So police department is definitely a challenge. Our facilities department as well, and our city clerk's office, because they have, regularly having to turn out packets. The other thing that we've really heard is particular to our spring summer cohort. So the one that we're in right now is, people have kids, their kids go on holiday and they want to be able to take those family vacations. So not being able to have, having 5 weeks taken out of the year where they can't really take a week-long vacation with their family is hard. So we're trying to look at some different ways to do that. Because for us, obviously work-life balance, having, that connection with family is really important for our organization. So we want to see what other ways we might be able to provide this information.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Well, and cool that you're applying those continuous improvement principles to the program about process improvement and performance. So I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So this has been a great conversation, Kayla. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. The hardest question always for us is the last question we end on. So if you could be the GovLove DJ for this episode, what song would you pick as the exit music for our chat today?
Okay, so this is actually not a hard one for me because I think it's so fitting for ending something, and it would definitely be Shut Down by Blackpink.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, our producer will get that queued up. And that ends our episode today. Kayla, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. This has been awesome, and it's really cool to see all the work going on in Brighton. So we'll be sure to link to all the information I know you guys have on your website, and then I know you've given a few presentations. We can link to those as well. So, but I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and share your expertise and all the cool work going on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and we're always posting out on LinkedIn if anybody wants to keep up with any of the programs, and also regularly making contributions to the ALGL Morning Buzz. So yeah, keep it on the lookout there.
Yeah, another way to stay engaged with what's going on.
Yes. Plug for the Morning Buzz there.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Well, for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Your membership helps support this podcast, and you can learn more about GovLove and see our past episodes by going to elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. And subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. If you're already subscribed, go tell a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, your boss about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. With that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. Bunch of wannabes that wanna be me three if I was you. Been around the world, pose on your girl, VVS is being invested, need a lesson.
listen to the neck and see the stresses. We don't buy, we regress it. A rock star, a pop star, but rowdy to say bye to the paparazzi. Get my good side, I'll smile for ya. No, it ain't fair to ya. It's staring you like what now? Blackpink in your area, the area been shut down. It's a shutdown.
네 다음 답안지가 똑바로 봐도 sleep, baby. 뒤집어봐 이건 가격표 ain't cheap, baby.
Stay in your own lane, cause I'm about to swerve.